Awesome. Thank you. So, Felix Lindner.
Thanks. And there's neither beer nor Jägermeister on stage. What a shitty conference. Good morning. I'm FX. And this is my keynote speech that I finished 3 o'clock this morning. So, what does that mean? So, some of you might recognize the game this is modeled after. What I wanted to talk about is the more general things in our industry, scene, whatever, that we tend to overlook. Because basically, there's only one way to actually play our game, and that's playing it to win. And that's really, really bad because, usually winning means not getting hacked. So the moment you're successful, nobody cares about you. The moment you suck, you're really, really visible to the CEO. Let's look at where this all came from, right? So we started, does that work? Excellent. So we started in 1969. There was 2 computers that were connected, one being, UCLA, one being at Stanford. And so, they started typing to the console and wanted to log into someone else's computer. Now, the 3rd character they sent actually crashed the login process on the receiving computer. So basically, in today's terms, the internet was born by a unauthenticated remote cyber attack. We had cyber attacks before we had cyber, right? But in today's legislation, that would actually cause, let's say, UCLA to get nuked by the US military. Or it could actually trigger Article 5 of the NATO, the defense situation, right? But that was not always the case. So in the beginning, people got it. People understood that, if your process crashes, you suck. It's not the other one that, is at fault. And then, we got lots of internet and lots of users, and they were supposed to be independent, right? So the whole point of this internet thingy it's not beer. The whole point of this internet thingy was to have a distributed network that, if you strike one side, then, the others can still play Tetris. So, this is how it looks today. But those were peaceful times, about 25 years, and then shit happened. So, in 1992, the US government actually allowed this brand new internet to interconnect with commercial networks. That was disallowed before that. Guess what? A year later, the first banners appeared, right? And everyone was like, what the fuck? What's that? Not loading images, thank you. And just a year later, there was an advertising company in San Francisco. Anyone having, I'm seeing a little Apple logo there. So when it says designed in California, that means those are the people that fucked up our internet, right? Because they sold it, and they still do. So this is the best map of the internet we have. You see, day and night. You don't really see day and night. What's funny about this is you can see where it's night because then, there's less users, except for the flyover country, which is like the middle part of the United States. That stays because they're all surfing porn. No, really, they're actually like the biggest porn users in the world. And what's interesting is like this map came from the Kana botnet. So the Kana botnet is actually one guy that smartly enough took over about like 140,000 home routers, and he took them over because they all had username admin, password admin, And then he basically installed Nmap on them, fixed the home router to begin with, like he closed them. And this is the best map of the internet we have. So, that's actually illegal, but funnily enough, the legal sources can't actually come up with that. So, I mentioned that this internet thingy was actually built to be independent, right? Now, we managed to build a globally distributed network that will survive on its own, and then we centralized everything. This is a graph, a usage graph from about maximum 5 minutes outage of Google services. And when that happened, and that was, the time here is actually US time, I think it's PST. So it's in the middle of the night, and 40% of all users on the internet couldn't find any website anymore. Because when they want to go to a Hotmail, they go to Google and enter Hotmail. And that didn't work anymore. So, internet was broken for them. There's actually stories about people getting fired because they suggested using Bing. Yes, that happened. Financial industry, New York City. But you should realize that within those about 3 to 5 minutes, Google lost $500,000 in ad revenue, just pure ad revenue, which is all of you clicking on Google, right? Because you're the product. And no other company in the world actually reported any financial damages, which is interesting when you compare that to their statements that they usually do about how much revenue they lose because of cyber attacks and evil people like me. Yeah. So this is all very, very similar to an old science fiction novel, which is dear to my heart. Basically, if you look at it, so what I'm talking about is the novel from Frank Herbert, Dune, of course. And the core message in Dune is he who controls the spice controls the universe. Now, what is spice? Basically, the whole universe of Dune revolves around this concept that there's one planet which is, a shithole called Arrakis or Dune, and there is basically a rare earth element. In other words, a drug. Think of it as a natural occurrence of, let's say, cocaine. And nothing in the Dune world actually works without this spice, right? So navigation doesn't work, computing doesn't work, religion needs it. Pretty similar to some drugs in the United States. And for us, the internet has a very similar role because it's one unique thing that if you control it, you control the entire known universe. What's interesting here is, what's interesting here is there can only be one controlling entity, right? There's no way that you can actually share this nicely because, if you can control the known universe, you're not sharing this control with anyone else. That's just the way humans are, right? And so you can think of it as basically like porn on the internet, right? Without internet, we also had porn, but we had to go to shops or trade DVDs or whatever. So that's basically the unique source, right? And also very similar to our internet situation is that there was there's an imperator that we may or may not have. But governance is basically given to one of the great houses in Dune, which is very similar to our ICANN situation. If you followed end of last year, how let's say, Arabian imperators tried to take control of the internet, you see a very, very similar pattern. Now, what are the great houses in our case? This is especially made for Sergey. I think he's going to love it. So basically, we have three major players. The first major player is calling itself, funnily enough, the Global Observer. Can I get some beer? So, the Global Observer is actually a threat model. It's a threat model within the NSA. The NSA coined this term as a requirement for cryptographic algorithms that they develop. And the requirement was under the assumption that there's a global observer, meaning there's a threat actor that monitors the entire world. The cryptos must still hold. Funnily enough, they're the only one. The second house is what I call the Lord of Ring Zero. So this is basically people that don't have a global observer status, but they have really good hackers. And the third house that we all know and that we all get our hardware from is the Sandserg. Let me explain what that means. So, as I mentioned earlier, the internet was basically ordered, researched, paid for, and installed by the US military. Now they want it back. What's the big surprise? They basically just had us play with it for a while, and then, you know, the moment it was adopted, they're like, hee, that's us. You know, being surprised about that is like being surprised about porn on the internet. And we have been playing with a military infrastructure. That's just a fact, and you know, if anyone is surprised about so-called revelations on NSA's surveillance scale, think about their job. So imagine this: you're a superpower, and well, we all imagine this from time to time, right? But you're a superpower. You made an internet. Everyone is flocking to the internet and using it. And then you're an agency in the superpower, and your task is, you know, monitor suspects. What the hell are you going to do? You're going to use the infrastructure that actually your country provides to the rest of the world to monitor everyone. It's, you know, they did their job, basically. Yeah, why shouldn't they do anything else? It would actually be an embarrassment for them if they hadn't done it this way, right? Because they can. Yes, we can. Yes, we can. So the other players actually don't have that luxury. The other players don't actually control the entire infrastructure. So, well, they... Don't you like the Crimea thing? But they have, you know, really strong ties to people that can, you know, do things. Basically, yeah. The Vladijken have the most powerful hackers in the world, and you know, they're not hindered by something as annoying as a democratic process. Right? There's no FISA court to ask. There's no government oversight. There's just go hack it, which they're actually really good at. Like a couple of years back, a European country discovered that their entire foreign ministry, every single IP address in that foreign ministry, was actually owned and controlled by the Russians. That was funny because that went on for 4 years. And the thing is, when you control a network, the way you do that is you actually know the network better than the people that run the network. And so basically you administrated the network for them, which happened in this case. So they're like, hey, this is all going really well. Everything is updated. Everything works. Nice. We can fire a few sysadmins, which they did. And then it turned out that, well, the sysadmins that you have are not actually yours. And I mean, to the extent to underline how good this was, they actually had a 64-bit and a 32-bit perfect disassembler running in the Windows kernel. For the only reason that when you updated Windows, it will actually disassemble the updates while being applied to find out whether the offsets in the data structures that the rootkit usually patches changed and adjust the rootkit. This is the level of advanced stuff we're talking about here. That was actually really, really nice. Now, let's talk about circling. If you talk to Chinese government people, so I was at a conference there, and the opening speeches confused me, not only because they were in Chinese, but also the translation kept mentioning a sensor network. I'm like, okay, what the hell is that? I looked around. I was not the only speaker in the room, so it must have been the right conference. But it turns out this is how China describes their own internet infrastructure. Because the reason is, if you're monitoring everyone by design, you actually have a completely different architecture of the network, right? You don't have a mesh like we have, but you have central points where the government sits and gets all the data. And if that works, then the two computers can actually talk to each other. Now, you should consider when you think about threat models, and you know, nowadays everyone goes like, okay, so it's all NSA. Pro tip: the Chinese didn't go away; they're still there, and they're still hacking. The thing is, we're talking about over 1 billion people. And you know, if you have over 1 billion people, they compete with each other a lot because it's not a rich country, right? So there is a lot of internal competition. If you have a lot of internal competition with over 1 billion people, you still have a lot of really good people left once the competition is over. Does that make sense? So at the same conference, a key experience for me was 2 girls that were hardly 20 years old that they fumbled around how to ask the question in English after I talked about Cisco iOS hacking. And they asked the only question that I have not covered in the talk, which is a problem that you run into if you have backdoored a shitload of routers, not before. They were 20. I did mention that, right? So, you know, when everyone looks at the NSA as a threat nowadays, please do consider that there's a metric ton of Zerglings over there that have that level of skill, right? Also, you know, consider that China is the #1 market for the next decade. That's a fact. That's not going to change unless we really, really step up our amount of sex and step down our amount of birth control. This is going to stay, right? So nobody actually, even today yet, nobody has the balls to actually call China protectionism. If, let's say, if Sweden would start, you know, taxing special goods that come in, let's say German cars, there would be outcry in the European Union, stuff like that. If you want to actually do anything in China, you actually have to, required by the government, you actually have to build a joint venture in China, right? You have to make a joint venture with someone Chinese. And that someone Chinese has to have at least 51% voting power of the company. So usually what happens is the story of Huawei Symantec, incapable people find themselves really easily, is a really good example. So they made a joint venture, and then 2 years later, Symantec pulled out because Huawei had completed the source code backup and the patent backup. So this is what we're looking at today, right? Also, in June, bless you, in June as well as in the case of Terra, the great houses are what we call APT. So Sergey and I and Rodrigo have found the definition of APT being advanced. It worked, right? That's all of it. Credit to Sergey. Persistent means it worked again and again and again because you didn't do shit. And the threat only means you have no idea what they want in your network, right? But also, the threats that we're dealing with today, they are high-tech. There are different types of high-tech, but they're all high-tech. They're constant. Just because, there's yet another leak from somewhere doesn't mean that everyone else goes away, as I mentioned before. And those threats actually are pretty regardless of our society. So they really don't care. Take the case of the Aramco attack where supposedly the Iranians thought, oh, Stuxnet, we can do that as well. If you looked at it, I have the theory, like if you looked at the code, it was written in Delphi, Pascal. You remember that? My theory is actually, after I looked at a sample of this code, that the case that they deleted 70,000 or 50,000 computers was actually not because that was the plan. The plan was actually to attack the oil production, which would have global impact. I think they deleted all the computers out of embarrassment. Once they deployed the malware, they realized how bad it is, and then they, told it to kill itself. But in fact, the powers that play with the internet, with our unique source of porn, really don't understand what the fuck they are doing. And this is also in parallel to Dune. Only the natives actually get how the system works, right? And that's what is systematic knowledge. So in the case of Dune, the Freemen are the only ones that understand the relation between a big worm, which is a native thing in Dune, and the spice that everyone is after. For everyone else, the worm is just a threat. Like hackers on the internet, right? And the great worm, in fact, is actually essential to the spice production, which is also very similar to, who keeps the internet running. Hackers are not only the evil people, but, people that dream BGP are hackers in my terminology, right? And the funny part is that the worm is essential for spice production, and the other part is water and excrement. So talk about making shit happen. But so the big powers, try to kill the worm that is actually essential for the production of what they want. The natives in Dune or on the internet basically observe their environment, respect it, and strive for integration, right? And they understand that they will never actually get the full picture. And they also resist temptations of luxury and, out of tradition. So if I would imagine a Freeman coming to Terra today, and I will tell him about hackers using Gmail, he would probably religiously kill those hackers. You know, the standard argument is, but it's so convenient, and then I keep thinking, well, being dead is also pretty convenient. And, you know, the framing would actually insist on using PGP. There's always some asshole basically selling his soul, but they have a honorable procedure, you know, how you can actually restore your honor by, you know, assuming your full responsibility and not dodging it. Also very similar between Dune and our internet is there's messiahs, more than one. And you know what Frank Herbert showed nicely is that, you know, every hero's legacy is perverted eventually, provided that person was a hero to begin with. Now, let's talk about full disclosure. Because full disclosure has some relevance. To you know, secrecy and leaks and stuff like that. So where does full disclosure come from? Basically, back in the day, when you had internet servers, let's say Sun Solaris, right? It came with enough vulnerabilities for, you know, 20 remote routes by default. Now, the thing was, if you complained to Sun, even as a paying customer, they would say, oh, no, we're busy writing Java. So the only way to actually get stuff fixed in order to protect your own damn systems, you will actually need to publicly shame them. And public shaming is what full disclosure was meant to do. Now, there's this age-long discussion whether full disclosure is okay to do or not, which is still fiercely fought. But interestingly enough, it is not the first time. The first documented full disclosure discussion comes from the 1850s in UK, when the discussion went about locksmith and people that code lockpick and whether it's okay to actually teach each other lockpicking. Now, full disclosure is important enough that it's actually standardized with ISO by now. Funnily enough, for those people that still love to bash Microsoft, that was actually driven by Microsoft. And full disclosure is going away due to the three houses fighting over our internet and, you know, using their natives as much as they can. And with full disclosure going away, perversely, all the tools that we rely on also go away. Vulnerability scanners? What the hell are you scanning for if you don't know the vulnerabilities? So that's probably not a good thing. And nowadays, you know, we see news outlets that run stories about how things are, allegedly based on material from Mr. Snowden, which was supposedly reviewed by that news outlet. I could claim the same thing and prove as much as they do, right? The thing is, they tell us, look, here in your country, this organization has been hacked and that organization has been hacked. You know what? If hackers will actually do that, they will go to jail, right? Imagine you will actually go ahead and tell the world, look, this provider has been hacked and I know about it because I also hacked it. You would go to jail. If you say, well, the same thing, but say it's based on some Snowden document that you supposedly saw, that's supposed to be fine. And also, we figured responsible disclosure many, many years ago. So basically, you talk to the affected parties first, have them fix everything, and then you go tell the world, yay, look what I found. So what I'm really concerned about is, like, why the fuck hasn't anyone that supposedly has access to the Snowden stack of documents first thing in the morning went through it, what are the affected companies, and caught them. Hello, you have the NSA in your network. Bye, click. So not a big deal, right? If they don't care about it, that's a different thing. So what we see is things that will bring us to jail are now considered cool, right? So previously or recently released documents about Germany actually contain passwords. They blacked out all kinds of things, but they left the password in there, which was actually the password for the entire network management system of a satellite communication company. Fine, you can do that. No, you can't. It's actually illegal in Germany. You would actually go to jail. And so maybe someone can explain at some point to me why the whole stack isn't released, because it's the same people that, you know, are WikiLeaks fans and worked with WikiLeaks, and their story is to release everything. So why are we sitting on a stack and release pointedly and, you know, show PNGs that supposedly are screenshots from PDFs that supposedly came from the NSA? I'm not getting it. I'm really not. By Occam's razor, which means the simplest answer is mostly, or is often the correct one, we might be looking at the phenomenon of today's revolutionaries become tomorrow's dictators, unfortunately. Whatever. We actually have work to do, right? Because we still can't buy secure computers. So let's talk about that instead of PNGs. You remember the time when people, or do you remember people, or maybe know people, that when they're supposed to talk about computer security, they say firewall? Let me explain where that came from. So, I'm talking about a few paradigms here. The perimeter security paradigm, that's the firewall thingy, right? So the idea is outside is war, inside is good. In fact, this was never really a security device. It was actually a organizational measure. Basically, what's called personal firewalls was, you know, developed quite a while ago and was called a TCP wrapper or turning off the daemon. But so this had the problem that you actually had to call everyone in the organization and say, turn off SendMail. It sucks, and it's on Solaris. Turn it off, right? And occasionally people would not do it. So then Pharma and VitsVN came up with this idea of, well, we could put a host in front where we basically don't let through port 25, and then Professor Dr. Joey Sixpack can keep running SendMail because he's not going to be affected. The problem with that is, the whole problem with the firewall idea is, it is the opposite of what you actually want when you connect computers to networks. Because, you know, to have the value of a computer connected to a network, the computer needs to talk on the network. So if you turn it off, then why do you have a network in the first place? And that doesn't really scale. So we came up with the next idea. Because we could still not bother Professor Dr. Joey Sixpack to actually do shit, we figured, well, let's find the focal points, you know, let's find something and cut this hole, like, you know, plug this hole and be good. So, yeah, because everyone exploits SendMail. Now the problem is, the idea is clear. You want to be minimal invasive, you know, the business is not bothered with your security, blah, blah. And the problem is it's fundamentally flawed because hackers tend not to be natural disasters. They might smell like some, but they're not statistically, right? So if you plug the most common hole, it stops being the most common hole because everyone goes somewhere else, right? So that really doesn't work. And also, if you put up a fancy protection over something, people break in other ways, and then the next thing they do is look at the thing that you put a fancy protection on because apparently it's valuable and apparently it's vulnerable, right? Because otherwise you wouldn't have invested in a protection. So, in which case we came around and invented Snort. The detection paradigm. So the idea is pretty much the same for antivirus, for IDS, for IPS, blah, blah, blah. The next silver bullet is you basically detect the attack when it happens. Cool. Well, that ignores the composite nature of computers and of attacks. That means, there's a reason why IDSs just look silly just when you use fucking Metasploit and tell it to use whatever encoder and some other payload. Because, they're composed. Computers are composed, attacks are composed. So, not really good. Also, there's a tactical problem because there's a situational awareness issue for the people running and defending the network. Why is nobody looking at IDS logs? Because it's pointless. Either the attack was so obvious that you should have prevented it in the first place, or, bless you, you're not really sure what it is. It could be, in most cases, it is a false positive. But if it's an indicator of something larger going on, you now have to, in real time, verify that it's actually something larger going on. In which case, the decentralized backup in Asia already happened, right? And then the last thing we came up with is, or not the last, but like one of the last, is the vulnerability identification paradigm. So basically, we try to find all the vulnerabilities and fix them. That's a good thing to begin with. It, sounds good. It actually acknowledges the root cause that your shit sucks. But, it ignores the whole class of vulnerabilities, which happens to be one of the biggest. It's the interface vulnerabilities, so two things talk to each other and don't understand the same thing. And did I mention it? Full disclosure goes away? Because, you're getting a couple of 100,000 for a vulnerability if it's an actual exploit, so you're not telling them. And perversely, most software vendors, especially in the US, really support full disclosure going away. Because, if the vulnerability isn't announced, then it didn't really happen, right? So you're not vulnerable. Then it's fuzzing. So, fuzzing was, before some kids talked about it, was called worst case boundary testing. And it was clear that worst case boundary testing does not scale. Now we call it fuzzing, and we think we're finding all the vulnerabilities with it. Not likely. So, here's the states. Here's the 1-bit variables that you have in your program, just 200. I assume your program has more. And then here's the number of states. Please note that the y-axis is a logarithmic scale, right? So, no, you should not be fuzzing. You should be thinking about the shit you're building. Because the problem being that, security software is actually, quality-wise, except for call center support bullshit, the worst software in the world. Veracode actually has solid numbers on that. There is no software that is worse, or almost no software that is worse than security tools, like firewalls. Basically, by quality level, you will be better off defending your network with Microsoft Word than with a checkpoint firewall, okay? For multiple reasons, because Word also doesn't have a back channel to Israel. But this is not how we go forward, right? Software vendors increasingly handle product security as a public relations problem. Talk about Apple or Oracle. So basically, If it's not in a press, the vulnerability doesn't exist. And all your customers think you're really cool, and they fire the people that usually will install the patches that you ship, right? And if all that doesn't work, there's still DMCA or whatever, local law to make the hackers shut up. The thing is, secret services, militaries, and whoever else like to blow PR up in our faces. Give you an idea. So, take as an example, Cisco. I have a long relation with Cisco. They love me, more or less. So, they pour lots and lots of money in their marketing about their security services and their knowledge about the Internet of Things, meaning we're connecting more broken shit to our internet. So the core of everything they're making money with right now, Cisco became the second biggest server vendor, perversely, because they fucked up routers. Now they needed something else to fuck up. So they're a big data center vendor now. And at the core of them, there's virtual networking, right? Virtual networking sounds really good, especially if you're a Cisco. Now, we looked at the core of that, the Nexus 1000V, and it turned out to use a fixed AES key and a fixed initialization vector hard-coded. It turned out the whole Nexus product line does that. So we talked to Cisco. And it's a design vulnerability. And I really talked to them. Like, I have a call with the entire product team. This is all being for free, mind you. And so I tell them, look, there's easy ways to actually fix that. There's lots of shared secrets between your ESX servers. Use those shared secrets. You don't have to use the hard-coded key. And here's a migration path you could do. They had to open a bug. What happens is they frequently just closed it as fixed and told the customers everything is fine now, which they still do. It's basically cheaper to lie to your customers than actually do anything. So this is what actually happens nowadays. It is, everyone thinks, hey, let's put stuff in a cloud, it's more secure, No, basically what they think is, yay, then security is someone else's problem. And so they put everything in the cloud and just hope that things will do better. But, they will not. As I said, full disclosure, sadly died. So in case you do have, this being a keynote, I needed to provide a key, right? So in case you do have VMware clouds running virtual Cisco infrastructure, this is a value that you potentially should apply to AES and packets that go over your network, which will then allow you to talk on the virtual backplane of your switches and basically take over port groups and shit. Quite useful. So basically, we keep piling broken stuff on top of broken stuff, and then we're surprised that it's not helping. Let's see what we can do about that. The common wisdom says, we're running software stacks and network stacks, right? And the crazy professor actually found out that, or found the terminology that, the stack is a lie, right? Welcome to composition. It is not really a stack, unless, of course, you take a CISSP certification. Then the stack is important because it declares the boundaries of competence, which chapter you would actually need to learn for this part of the quiz. That's basically the most useful application for the stack. But you know what? We're actually really good in composition. We're actually really good in composition because we have ages and ages of practice, thanks to Denmark. Basically, all you need in composition is small, reliable building blocks in a really well-defined, not breakable interface. Well, they choose nipples. I don't, argue about that interface. For computers, we might actually need something more. And this is called a grammar. And I'm not going too deeply into that. This is just my strong recommendation that you should actually listen to Meredith and Sergey, who will actually explain LangSec to you in a real. But the thing is, if your grammar is correct, you can only fuck up higher logic layers, or people betray you and then travel to Moscow. Basically, because if you have good interfaces, you can generate a lot of stuff. Do you think that the really big Lego things, someone really sits there and tries them out? No, they design them and then generate a plan how to fucking connect the Lego pieces. It might be bullshit, but then it's provably correct bullshit. Awesome. That's what we want, right? It can still be an iPhone app. So if you're not doing that, you could just go the Berlin way and, call it art. Or Nginx, Nginx. That would also work. Because, people think... So last week, I gave a talk at a founders conference, like startup seed conference, and I asked who knows what the halting problem is. Can you raise a hand if you have heard of the halting problem? Come on. Yeah. If you have not raised your hand, don't write software ever. Thank you. Thank you. Because look, it's not only the program; it's also about the input, right? The input is as much part of the problem as the program. You can't really filter input. Every input is the code that runs on the virtual machine that you call a program. Basically, everything is an interpreter, right? So think of it like your brain. Your recognizer is what makes you go, hot go, hot go. And the actual processing that should happen after the recognition is shit, ladyboy. Those are two distinct steps, and unless we build our systems the same way, we're not really getting anywhere. So basically, this is what we call professional experience, right? You fucked it up before, you know how it is. So, if you ignore that elephant in a decidability room, then you're dying. It is not an irrelevant, and so the simple summary of LangSec is basically you must be this small to survive, which is the red line, right? Otherwise, what you argue with could turn out to be a root shell. Composition is a bitch, and the problem is updates are her sex toys. So think of it. IBM found out in 1984 already that every time they tried to fix something in a host system, they had a 15% chance over all their business units to actually make the whole system worse, right? Mind you, worse. It's not saying the fix didn't work. It's saying it was worse than before, right? And why do you think that changes with your iPhone? It doesn't, right? Every time, you touch the system, you change the entire composition. That means the people that actually need to defend the system actually learn a new system. Operators know that. You remember novel network servers? There's a reason that they actually were, forgotten in dorm rooms and stuff, because they just worked. You could actually listen to them and find out if shit goes wrong. So you could tell if there's someone in there. Now compare that to an Arch Linux server. I call it Arch Linux because it's mostly made in Germany, and they update everything every 5 minutes. Now keep going. Think about that. How do you want your car to get over-the-air updates every morning when you drive to work, or hopefully? Many embedded system vendors had no problem with Heartbleed simply because they were not updating OpenSSL every 5 minutes that some punk told them to do so. There is a reason that, in medical devices and stuff, you're not supposed to change the software because then you need to recertify because you're changing the entire damn system, right? And also, if you try whitelisting, well, the biggest company for whitelisting had no whitelisting on their server that held the key for all the whitelisting. Why? Because it was updating all the fucking time. And that's really a problem because patching actually makes defense worse. It makes it harder. If you apply the patch, you're changing the entire system for the defense. So the defense is back to square one. You have to find out how the whole system works, right? The attacker actually gets another chance. Think of ASLR and stuff. The memory layout changes. Let's see, maybe something is exploitable that wasn't before, which actually happens often to be the case. So, and if you wait with patching, so you're not changing your system all the time, you're making free ODay. That's not really smart. Because, we end up being a world of addicts. In patch because we're addicted to a functioning computer, and so we get the patch, we get the next patch, we get the next patch, next version. If you know someone with a drug addiction, that's pretty much the same pattern, right? So the thing here is, have you realized that software isn't sold? What's sold is a license for you to use a copy, not necessarily a correct copy, mind you, of that software. So what you're buying or what you're actually renting in legal terms is a license. So there's no product, which means there's no product liability, right? There's two industries in the world that have no product liability, software and drug cartels. It's the only two industries that call the customers users. Think about that. The thing is, so you don't have product liability, but you have a license, so you could call it a contract. But then the contract actually disclaims all warranty and all liability for damages as much as they can, even open source software. That's the capital letters part in a GNU license. Yes, same here, right? So the core of the problem is that if you build software that doesn't suck, you sell it once. If you're Oracle, then you sell time and time and time again, right? Because it's broken and people can't sue you, so they buy the next version and the next version and the next version and the next version. So basically, there is no money in making secure software. And until that changes, we're stuck with stupid ideas. Because, if it's bad, take the cloud, make it worse. Terms of service. Terms of service are the cloud version of your software license, right? So what I really love about this one, I love Apple, not. iCloud. Basically, one of the core parts of their terms of service is they can delete all your data anytime for any reason. That's not really what their marketing story tells me, right? So it tells me I can make naked pictures of famous people and put them in the iCloud and it will be secure. You know what's funny? Geklaut is in German the past tense of stolen. So cloud makes a lot more sense in German actually. Or look at Google, right? Google basically can use your content for everything they do now and in the future, forever. That's okay, fine. World is not going to change, right? Look at it geopolitically. Nobody expected that we have a war in Europe against Russia like a year ago. Now think about, you put everything in the cloud and then the world changes. Thank you. What I like the most is actually TwitPic. They take credit for your content. They make it their own. They reproduction is theirs. Basically, all the rights are with them, except for when someone complains legally, then it's your problem. So, yeah, nice cloud service. Thank you. Well, and then there is this trust issue, right? Because, why do we care about secure computers? Because we want to trust them. So the cloud now says, hey, look, you can trust us. Look at Google. Google doesn't say we're evil, so we're not evil. Oh, it leaked? That must be your fault. Remember, and this is how it works in the banking industry as well. Unfortunately, data leaks actually have caused suicides already. So, to conclude, the thing is, okay, so far we suck, right? But we're pretty much the only natives left, right? We should learn, we should think, we should experiment, not repeat stuff that, someone publishes somewhere or, is supposedly coming from a cheap hotel room in Moscow or a embassy in UK, but actually think for ourselves and, work on actually making things better, sharing them, and keeping promises, and building software that keeps promises, which Meredith is now going to go into detail after me, so I'm not going there. Basically follow the old hacker ethics. Because it is our principles that really define our future, right? And we should adhere to our principles. Do we Gmail or do we apt-get install postfix? Which actually is a quicker way to get email than setting up a Google account, by the way. Do we hype everything? Do we repeat every story that someone says, here, I hacked this and I hacked that, and then, no, you hacked the emulator that does that? That's a different thing. Because what we repeat is what business leaders in governments actually follow. So if we make a hype out of something, then, we're calling for people that have even less idea of what they're talking about to do something, because they are paid to do shit, no matter whether they understand it or not is a different question. They're paid to do something, right? So if you say, hey, look, I hacked the entire energy grid, what happens is your government comes up with regulation. And that regulation will be stupid, trust me. Because they're not asking you about the regulation. They're only taking your hype, right? So, with that, basically, whatever we do, whether, we hype or we actually work, it is a self-fulfilling prophecy because we are the ones being the prophecy and causing it. So, it will be our future, one way or the other. Thank you very much.
Har du en vanlig mikrofon? Well, thank you very much, FX.
I'm in time.
You're on time, and this is actually amazing. I'm really happy about that. Yeah, last year I kind of remember a first speaker that dragged on like 20 minutes over time or something. Have you come up with a parallel to the thumper, by the way, for the Dune thing?
So, yes. So the thumper is how you attract worms, right? So, yes, we actually have, because it turns out, worms are segments, right? They're strings. Right. And only the natives can actually write the string. So a thumper will, in how you control the string, the grapplers, that in computer terms is 0 bytes, right? Because, longer string, shorter string. If you attract a worm like that, shall we call it PHP?
Yes, why don't you? Awesome. So, do we have questions for FX from the audience? We have 5 minutes before coffee break. No? Come on.
No.
Oh, we go.
This is more a question for the audience. How many here uses Gmail? I do.
What?
Oh, we are fucked.
The question is using it for what? People use it ironically too. So, more questions? All right, in that case, I want to thank Felix very much. Thank you.